Hey, today we are going to continue talking about triangles, but we are going to move on to a new topic in triangles, and we're going to talk about what happens when those triangles are congruent. So a couple notation items here. Congruent, we've talked about before a little bit. We've given this symbol, excuse me for that. It's this squiggly with an equal sign underneath it, and that is the symbol for congruent. And of course, we're going to use a triangle as a symbol for a triangle. And so we have what we would call a triangle congruence statement, like this. So that is sort of a long way to say that these two triangles are congruent, and this statement tells us about it. And so if I go and I look for triangle UST, UST is this triangle that starts at U, goes to S, and then T. There's UST. And then triangle UXY is this triangle UXY. And this statement is telling us that, hey, these triangles are congruent. And so that tells us some information about these triangles. We can go now and look at these triangles, and if we find an angle in this first triangle UST, and we find the angle that matches or corresponds in the other triangle UXY, we know that those angles are going to be equal to each other, the same measure, and therefore they'll be congruent. And we could say the same thing about any side in this first triangle. If it corresponds to the side in this triangle, then they're going to be the same length. That makes them congruent. And so, of course, we need to know how to figure out which pieces correspond. I'm going to erase this a bit. And when we have two congruent triangles, every piece, angle or side, and when I talk about pieces of a triangle, I'm talking about the angles or the sides. Every piece in this triangle UST is going to have a piece in this triangle UXY that it matches up with. It corresponds. So correspond means matching. When I say corresponding, I mean matching. And when we look at the names of these triangles, they're named very intentionally because the matching pieces are named in the same order as the in one triangle to the next. So if I look at the names, the first letter is letter U, and that means in each triangle, angle U matches angle U. So if I go down here in my first triangle, I'm going to put a little mark in here, and then I put a little mark in here, and that's showing me that angle U in this triangle is congruent to angle U in this triangle. And then my second letter is S and X. That means angle S in this triangle corresponds to angle X in this triangle, and they're going to be congruent. And so I'll put two little arcs in there to show that they're equal to each other, but they're not necessarily equal to these other angles. They might be, but we don't know that. What we do know is that angle S and angle X are the same size, they're congruent, they're equal. And then if I look at the last letter, T and Y, that means those two match, they correspond, and that means they're the same size, they're equal measures, they are congruent. And I'm just going to put three arcs in those ones to show, again, T and Y are the same measure, they're congruent, but they're not necessarily the same as these other ones. We can do the same practice for the sides. So let me look at the sides of these two triangles, just so I don't make a big mess. Sides require two letters, so if I look at the first two letters, IH and CB, those sides correspond. So IH, I'll put a mark, CB, I'll put a mark. And then if I look at the middle and third letter, HG and BA, HG goes with BA. And then we can sort of, by process of elimination, know that IG and CA go together. So this is what I mean about corresponding parts in congruent triangles. We have this theorem, this rule that says that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, we shorten that to CPCTC. So if you ever see CPCTC somewhere, and we might use that later on in this unit, that just means if we have congruent triangles, we know their corresponding parts are congruent. So it's really, really important to be able to read the names of these triangles and use them to identify the pieces that correspond. And so in this problem over here, I want to find the angle that corresponds to angle FED. So I'm going to go find FED first. FED starts at F, goes to E, stops at D. It's this angle right here, and so I'll put a little mark in there. And then I'm going to go look. FED comes from this triangle name. And I'm going to sort of number the letters as they show up in the name of this angle. So F is first, then E is second, and then D is third. And so let me go number these the same way in the other triangle. So 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So that means when I'm writing my angle name that corresponds in this triangle, I'm going to write them in the same order. So the first letter was W. I'll put an angle symbol there, by the way. The second letter is D, and the last letter is E, W, D, E. W, I'll do a different color. W, D, E. This angle. Those are the angles that go together. And I use the names of the triangles to help identify which ones go together. When I have the 3 letters for an angle and I'm trying to find a corresponding angle, that typically ends up being one of the hardest ones to identify because we have to go back into the names, and we're sort of out of order here. But if you label again, I went F, first letter, E, second letter, D, third letter. And so I can then go over here to my other name and number these in the same order, 2, 3, 1. And then I can use that to develop this name. The first letter is W, the second letter is D, the third letter is E. This might take some practice, as always. If you need some clarification, ask us for help. In these triangles, I want to find the match for FE. Which side in my other triangle corresponds to FE? So I can go and look at the triangle that has FE in it. That's my first and second letter, and there's FE right there. So I'm going to go look at the first and second letter of my next triangle. That is V and U. So I'm going to go find VU. I'll put a mark there. And those two sides correspond. And so FE should be congruent to VU. Again, congruent means that they're the same size. If I were to measure side FE in this triangle, it would be the same length as triangle VU in this triangle. And I figured out they correspond by looking at the names of the triangles. So we can sort of bring that all together here, and we can write full triangle congruent statements. So at the beginning today, we started with the triangle congruent statements, these statements that said that 2 triangles were congruent. And those help us find the corresponding parts. So if we know an angle in one triangle and we know those triangles are congruent, we can find the matching angle. If we know a side in one triangle, we can find its matching side if we know those triangles are congruent. And so now if we have these triangles with the markings that show they're all congruent, then we can write the names of the triangles. And so typically I like to start with the triangle on the left, or that looks like it's furthest to the left, so maybe this triangle is furthest to the left. And I'm just going to go in order of the number of markings. And I'm just going to look at the angles here. I'll ignore the sides. If I look at the angles, E has 1 mark, B has 2 marks, C has 3 marks. So now when I go write the name of my second triangle, I can go 1 mark E, 2 marks L, 3 marks K. And I know that the first letter in each triangle are the 2 matching angles there. The second letter, D and L, they both have 2 marks. They match. And K and C have 3 marks and they match. And we have to have them in the right orders here. Again, I'm going to start with the name of this triangle here. And I'm going to start with the angle that has 1 arc. That's I. And then the angle that has 2 arcs is J. And then 3 arcs is K. And then over here, I'm going to go 1 arc. Again, that's I. It's not always the case that it's the same letter. And then 2 arcs is J. 3 arcs is L. And so I have them named so that the matching angles are in the same place in the names. Again, if this is at all tricky to you, please do ask for help so that we can clarify or maybe revoice what's happening here. So now let's have you try a couple problems yourself. I want you to find the side in the other triangle that corresponds to side UV. So you should have picked VJ. If you did not, please raise your hand and ask for an explanation why it should be VJ. Give this one a try. Write the names of the triangles that are congruent to each other in this picture. So here they are. If you had these slightly out of order, but the orders match, it could be right. So if you don't have TEF and TRS, do raise your hand and we'll make sure that you got it right. And if you didn't, we'll make sure that we can help you fix that mistake. So as always, there's practice related to these. Make sure you answer the questions related to these problems. The pictures are kind of big, so I'm going to have to scroll a few times. Take your time on these. When you need help, ask right away so that we can help you. Take your time and good luck.